excited to have Steve Pereira with us today. He spent over 2 decades improving the flow of work across organizations, worked with tech support, IT management, build and release engineering, a number of other things. So, for an enterprise software as a service. He serves as lead consultant for Visible Value Streaming Consulting, where he applies flow engineering to tackle complex work in the world's enterprises. So, Steve, very excited to have you here today, and I will turn the floor over to you.
Thanks so much. Everyone can hear me okay? I hope. Wonderful to be here. Very excited to be sharing. And let me kind of introduce the topic here, like what we're really aiming for with flow engineering. It can sound like a fancy thing. It can sound very technical. But in essence, what we're really aiming for is this idea of getting more done, but not just that, more of the right thing done, right? We spend a lot of time doing, and in my opinion, not enough time improving how we're doing things, and even focusing on the right things to do. So flow engineering is essentially a way to step away from the work to understand more about how the work is working and not working, and how to move it to a place where it's working better. And I'll describe how that happens and what that looks like throughout the presentation. And I think we're going to have a lot of time for questions at the end. So as we're going, please feel free to add questions, and I will get through as much as possible. But the good news for you is that there's a lot of other material out there about this. So if you are interested, by the time we finish the presentation, there's many different places you could go to get more info and connect with other folks who are doing flow engineering and learn more about it. So just to kind of set the scene on what we're talking about, I want to talk about a case that was kind of from my early days of flow engineering, before I even called it flow engineering, or we had a actual program. We were just doing value stream mapping, and value stream mapping looks different in different contexts. It's highly manufacturing focused, although folks have more recently applied it to knowledge work. But it's large organization, very large, very complex organization, and Fortune 100 company in the US, many millions of dollars in budgets for various things, was looking to improve their deployment process. They actually had a tool in mind. They were basically ready to go. They just needed to secure budget for this. And this was their artifact deployment process. And what they engaged me for was to basically say, we need to make a good argument for investing in this solution. So we want to map the value stream. Oh, hold on. Let me see if I can resume. I think I lost a screen share. We're back. Good. So what they wanted to do was basically make a case to leadership to get this budget and pursue this initiative. And what happened was, when we mapped the value stream to demonstrate or quantify the impact of this improvement, we actually started looking at the big picture of what does it take to actually get work out the door. And artifact deployment was a piece of that puzzle. But by mapping this process and collecting the data, we surveyed all the stakeholders involved, all the contributors from across the workflow. And it turned out that there were these opportunities, right? These two areas where lots of time was being spent. And it turns out that artifact deployment was not one of them. There were these big opportunities upstream and downstream that were taking 10 times and 100 times the actual time, the lead time of artifact deployment. So it was very difficult. We could have made a case, right? We could say, okay, well, this will automate this step, and it will, we could say that it could reduce the lead time or the cycle time by 500%. But that's actually missing, the point. The point was that we found these huge opportunities because we stepped away from the work and we looked at what's actually happening in the context of the big picture. And I'll never forget one of the project managers there, after going through this effort, said, I've been here for 19 years, and this is the first time we've actually looked at the entire flow of activity. I've never seen this before. And that was really remarkable. And in other engagements, I've heard things like, this is the first time we've ever been in the room together. And these are people who, depend on each other. They hand work back and forth. They're part of the same flow, the same value stream. So I think that really makes a very strong case for doing this type of activity. These are hidden opportunities. And we're always trying to get investment. We're always trying to get buy-in for things that we want. But we should be able to make a case that they have a clear impact on the bottom line, a clear impact on the business. So flow engineering is kind of aimed squarely at that. Like, let's actually be more data driven. Let's actually visualize work. Let's actually manage the flow of activity in the organization and make investments and run experiments that we can quantify and that we can get effective buy-in for. And we can bring the team closer together because we can illustrate how we're all actually interdependent in a very consequential way. And then it has an impact on customers. So one other thing that I want to give you right away is the elephant in the room is AI, right? So everyone's talking about implementing AI, generative AI, or using supports like co-pilots and things like this. But the challenge with that is if you try to implement AI arbitrarily into your environment, then what happens is you will likely just be increasing the load on your constraint, right? If you're accelerating a part of your business upstream of your constraint, then what you're doing is essentially piling on a ton of work at an area that's already overloaded, right? So you will undoubtedly have one area of your workflow that is governing the performance of the entire workflow, right? There's one bottleneck that's slowing everything down. And unless you're applying AI to that, then you're effectively making the situation worse, right? If you're now generating more code than ever, but your code review process is your bottleneck, then you're just making things worse. If your testing process is what's governing the flow of work in the system, then you're just overloading that. And if you're implementing generative AI or some kind of automation downstream of the constraint, you're also not going to see any benefits from that. There's nothing is going to actually leverage the power of that solution that you're implementing because you're held back in another area. And this is pretty consequential. And a big reason why folks struggle to get buy-in is that, your customers, the stakeholders in the business, they're waiting for things to get done. And it's all well and good to have ideas and talk about automation and improvements and things like this. But if we're not addressing the constraint, then they're still going to be waiting, right? They're always going to be wondering, okay, these folks are bringing me all these ideas. They said that they're working on stuff. There's things happening. And yet I'm still waiting for things to get done for ages. And, we ultimately are not moving faster as a business. We're not innovating at the rate that we should be. And they start to question, where's all this money and effort going, right? What's the actual benefit that we're delivering here? And this can be very difficult for technical leaders because they get pressure from the business, they'll pressure from product folks. But it applies everywhere. You could have sales teams that are pressured to deliver. And if they are not addressing their constraints, then they're going to be very frustrated. And you've probably experienced this. I've experienced this many, many times. It's very frustrating to be improving things and not actually seeing outcomes improve. So we really want to be implementing our changes and improvements at the places that matter, these constraints, these bottlenecks, these hotspots, the friction points, where things are slowing down or where your quality is starting to fall apart. So we can look at all these things with a value stream map. So when we're talking about this flow of work, ultimately the flows of work that I care about the most are the ones that deliver customer value, right? The ones that are actually delivering what the business is in business for. And often to do that, we have to trace through the entire organization, right? We have these uh, flows of work that don't necessarily fit the org chart. We have to go up and over and talk to another person, and we have planning over in one section, and then we have delivery management in another section. We have customer success in another. We have marketing in another area, and that might not be something that we change overnight, but we should be aware of that path, right? We should know what that path is, and it should be measured. So this is kind of the science of value stream management, is understanding where those flows of work are and how we understand their performance and how we can design them to be more performant. And this is really valuable because as contributors or even leaders, we can only ever see a portion of the organization, right? So that means that a lot of this activity is beyond our view. And what happens is, we start to micro optimize because we're not able to see the actual constraint in the system, right? If we can't see the constraint, if it lies outside of our visibility, then we're going to be constantly optimizing something that doesn't actually have an impact on the business. So this leads to substandard outcomes and a lot of frustration, right? We're doing things that doesn't seem to have any positive effect. So flow engineering aims to address this situation and give us a program to follow, some steps of a process that can be repeated throughout an organization at various scales, very high level, very low level, really doesn't matter. But all these activities are in service of three main outcomes. One is identifying value. We start with that because it's the most important filtering mechanism to help us sort out the signal from the noise and also establish scope, right? If we jumped right into value stream mapping, which value stream should we be mapping? What should be the level of detail that we should map? Where's the start point and the end point? Which dependencies matter? All these rely on us setting a target outcome first. If we have a target outcome, we want to increase throughput, we want to reduce our production defects. That helps us understand what stream are we going to look at. So we start by identifying value, and I'll show you what that looks like. Then we look at mapping a value stream to understand what's the current state. Dependency mapping helps us dig deeper, but only where there's value. We dig deeper in the hotspots that we identify, not everywhere. So we keep this very lean and fast. And then we design a future state of what better looks like and create a roadmap that makes it actionable. So people often ask, okay, what does this actually look like? How do you get started? And so if we're thinking about a typical value stream where we're progressing through a sequence of activities to deliver value to customers, then there's multiple people involved. But really important off the start is to have someone who's a leader in the organization, someone who can authorize budget or make space for improvements, prioritize improvement efforts, right? We don't get very far if we don't have executive buy-in. So we start with that, and oftentimes we have to do outcome mapping, which I'll show you. We have to basically create a compelling case before we can even get them involved, but that's all built into flow engineering as well. To go through all these efforts, it's very helpful to have a facilitator, not because they know what to do necessarily, that definitely helps, but often it's very helpful to have someone who's outside of the workflow, because we don't want this to be political. We don't want this to be, an unsafe activity. We want psychological safety throughout this process. So having somebody who's from a different part of the organization or outside the organization can be very helpful. And then what we want is perspectives from across the value stream. So we'll have design folks, product folks, QA, development, operations, as representatives of what's actually happening in the workflow. But let's step back and talk about how we get started with this? What is the first mapping exercise, and how do we identify value? So this is the first part, and we start here because it allows us to get very clear on why are we doing this? What are we aiming to achieve? What are the negative conditions that we want to avoid or mitigate? What are we struggling with right now? Oftentimes, this is a great activity to do once you have OKRs, because you've got some clarity on where you're headed, but you don't necessarily know where to start or what you can do to move towards your OKRs. So we can factor that in. So that could be part of our context that we bring in. But often in organizations, we stall on OKRs because they require us to go somewhere that we haven't gone before, and yet we're not changing anything about what we're doing, right? Which means we're likely to be just running in circles or maintaining the status quo without changing something about our workflow. So we get a bunch of raw data out of the group to start with. We collect a bunch of perspectives, and then we can affinity map those things. So we often have multiple themes that arise, and we want to have a good conversation about what are we going to focus on, right? We can't tackle everything, and we can move very fast and be very effective if we focus. So oftentimes what happens is we just pick a point, we head towards it, we knock that off, then we move on to something else, right? But if we don't focus, we all know what happens when we try to juggle 4 things at the same time, right? Or move in 4 different directions at the same time. Nothing happens. So we use this affinity mapping to kind of distill and focus. We're always doing either expanding or contracting through flow engineering. We're always trying to get to more focus without missing any valuable information. So we expand, we'll collect a bunch of information, then we'll distill it down, and we'll do that over and over again. Lots, highly influenced by design thinking and a lot of other practices. So let's say that we've arrived on release throughput as an area of focus, and we distill that down into a target outcome. Sometimes this target outcome is handed to us by leadership, and they say, we have to do this. And that's great. It's great to have clear instructions, but often our clear instructions don't come with further instructions to get us started. So we can start from that target and use that to understand, why are we doing this? What's important about this thing? Because oftentimes, that target outcome may make sense or resonate with leadership, but an individual contributor doesn't necessarily know what's in that for me. Why do I need to be a part of this? Or how do I contribute to this? So we look at benefits from different perspectives. How does this matter to stakeholders, to customers, to contributors? And we'll, again, distill that down. Oftentimes we have lots of items here, and we are always distilling. And then we want to understand what's going to be in the way. So as we get started and pursue this outcome, what's going to hold us back? What are the things that have stopped us from getting there before? Or things that, we're worried might sidetrack us or hamper our ability to reach the outcome. And then we talk about other next steps. We don't have to do value stream mapping. In flow engineering, that is the natural next step, but we can also do interviews. We can do other types of analysis. We can survey. We can go collect a bunch of data. There's nothing in outcome mapping that kind of forces you into the next steps of flow engineering. You can go wherever you like. So this can be very helpful as just a mapping technique to help you get on the same page as your colleagues or other folks in the organization and pick a next starting point and be all on the same page. But in flow engineering, what we do is we go and we look at the flow of work that's involved in that target outcome. So this is where we're starting to build clarity and an understanding of where are we today, because that's going to inform what we define as our future state and where we're going. So there's a lot of different material about how do you identify a value stream. But primarily, if I were to summarize it, and I can link to anyone who's interested in lots of other material, but it's essentially answering the question of where does value come from? And we work backwards from that. So the value is delivered in the form of a release. And so what made that release actually reach customers? And we'll trace the flow of activity all the way back to its origin. And that gives us the value stream. And we can ask the question of how long does this typically take? How long did it take last time? And that gives us our performance data, which I'll show you. A lot of folks will wonder, okay, where are these value streams in the organization? And I see them everywhere. A lot of folks might not see them everywhere, but I think any flow of activity that's delivering value to the organization or its customers is best thought of as a value stream. It should be producing value. It should be managed. It should be visible. It should be tracked, and we should have data on it. And I've had a lot of success with looking at things like new hire onboarding as a value stream and mapping and managing that. We see massive improvements in lead time and throughput as a result of mapping these things as value streams. So I'm kind of a value stream maximalist in that way, and I'll continue to be so until, acting on these as value streams gets worse results than treating them as something else. Treating them as value streams is extremely effective. And I'll show you how we do that. So let's say that we have a release workflow. We could call it an agile release train. You could call it a product development lifecycle, whatever you want to call it. If it ends with deployment and release, so let's say we deploy it to production, we turn it on, and customers start using it, that could be the final stage in the value stream. And then we ask the question, what happened before that? What makes that possible? And what makes that possible? And we go all the way back to the start of the value stream. And that gives us a nice layout of all the stages of activity. And this is often different than whatever process diagram or flow chart we've defined, because flow charts are often not reflective of reality. They're like what we wish was happening. But a value stream is what's actually happening, right? So this is closer to the truth, closer to something actionable, closer to something that we can actually use to improve. But what makes this kind of actionable and insightful and valuable is adding this data about how long does each of these stages take and how much time passes in between each stage. And people will ask, well, how do you get the data for that? You can get it a number of different ways. You could get it from your systems if your systems are giving you information that's useful. So if you have, let's say, a Kanban definition of workflow that has each of these stages built out, and you can collect the aggregate or typical, let's say, 85th percentile data on each of these stages, and you're measuring the delays between the stages, then you could use that data. It's most likely that you're going to get the best data from just asking folks, what happened last time? And if last time is a total outlier, then we could talk about another reference point. We could talk about what is the typical performance. And folks will always struggle with this because in knowledge work, in a lot of organizations where they're not doing this type of activity, you have incredible variability, right? There's insane variation in last time it took this long, and 2 times before that it took 3 times longer than that. And this other time we had this totally unexpected scenario. And so what data will we use? Is there any value in even trying to get this data? And there's a lot of value in just highlighting the fact that you have crazy variation. We're all over the place. That is a condition that we can address. So it doesn't make it impossible to map. It can make it more challenging to get data that we're happy with. But even just highlighting that it's all over the place, and our best case scenario and our worst case scenario are miles apart, and we don't really have an 85th percentile that we know of, that's a great starting point. and we will get to more stability. We will get to more predictable data. But it's fine to start with data that you really don't feel good about, because we're starting from rarely having done an activity like this. In most organizations, they're not doing stuff like this. So it's no wonder that they have this crazy variation in the data, or they don't know what the data is. So by mapping this out, we collect some data. And the most important thing about this is we don't need precision, because oftentimes the hotspot stands out whether we had 3 weeks or 2.5 weeks or 4 weeks. It wouldn't matter. It's still the outlier, right? So if you're talking about variation and worried about, well, we don't have accurate data, or where are we going to get accurate data from? You don't need accurate data. You just need a focal point. You just need something that stands out. And there's always something that stands out. So we can collect this data. We can collect our starting point, and that gives us our baseline, our benchmark that we're going to work against as we define a future state that improves on that performance. That was a very simplistic example. This is a more realistic example. This is a real example from a large financial institution looking at their release train. And what you'll notice is 64 weeks of lead time, only 6 weeks of delay, which is actually, there's no way that it's 6 weeks of delay. It's just we didn't want to go dig and turn over every rock, and we didn't need to. But there's tons of delay in this workflow. There's months actually that are hidden in here, but that's fine. What we needed was a focal point, and we needed to be able to make a case to leadership for investing in improvements. And so if we look at a pretty common case, this is $2 million at least, just labor cost, just time. And we were able to redesign that without actually re-engineering any processes. We just changed how work was handed off, how it was started, when it was started, and really looked at which of these activities is part of the golden path, the critical path that you might say, and what are these things that have to happen, but they don't necessarily have to block anything else. And so we're able to find a lot of parallel activities as a part of that, cut the lead time in half, cut the costs in half, double the throughput of feedback, and spend more time on things that were valuable and less time on things that weren't. So we eliminate waste, we get faster delivery and feedback, we learn faster, we have better collaboration through the process. People feel a lot better about doing the work in that workflow. And there's a lot better and more effective collaboration as a result. So this is very, very low hanging fruit and very, very quick. So this was all mapped out in a couple of 90-minute sessions. It does not take a long time to do this. And that's some of the benefit. But even if you're saying, okay, 90 minutes, we're talking about 180 minutes for current state, future state. I've got hundreds of teams, and no one's going to allow me to do that. No one's going to allow me to take 90 minutes per team and map everything out. I wouldn't expect them to. And the good thing is you don't need to do that. So what we often find when we start mapping is that we map a couple of teams, and what we find is there's common dependencies, common bottlenecks, common issues that we can address. And when we address them across all of the value streams. Things like change advisory board processes, or certain approvals, or missing templates for critical tasks. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit here. And we don't address it. We don't even look for it because we don't step away from the work. But also, we don't really have effective playbooks for doing this type of thing. So flow engineering is really presented as an option to kind of give you something that you could use if you wanted to do this type of work. and hopefully helps you make a case that's better than, well, one of the assets is that you can say it's not my idea. It's written about in this book, or this other group is doing this, or there's a case study from this company or that company, which I'm happy to share with you folks to kind of support you. I want to talk a little bit about digging a little bit deeper and trying to understand dependencies. So dependencies have a huge consequence on throughput, right? They really have a negative impact on getting things done. And the way that we kind of address this in flow engineering is we don't care about every dependency that you have, right? We take forever to really map out all the complicated aspects of getting things done. We really only care about where this hotspot is, right? So we dig deeper where we see gold. That's one of the kind of core principles of value stream mapping and flow engineering is we really only need detail where there's an opportunity. So we dig a little bit deeper, right? And there's always a lower level of detail, right? People often get hung up on, well, how do we capture all of the things that are happening? And our approach in flow engineering is to go fairly high level to start and then dig down and get more detail where there's this opportunity, right? Where we see we have a desire for, there's a demand for more detail. So I've often seen in organizations, they map out value streams. I've seen 2,000 step value stream maps because they tried to map the most extreme level of granularity. And of course, by the end, everybody wants to never think about that again. And they never want to, they never want to look at the map because the map ends up being just massive mess. So we only get detail where there's value. And we do the same sorts of things. We highlight where most of the issues. And this can be collected, we can collect this data a number of different ways, but we try to use it to understand what are the causal factors behind the problems that we're seeing. And we use all that information to create our future state. So future state really is, what are we going to do to enable better flow in the short term? Our time frame is like 3 to 6 months. Let's do 3 months worth of improvement efforts, and then we'll monitor the system for another 3 months and do another round of flow engineering once the system is stabilized a bit. But primarily because you're busy doing the work. You don't have to be you don't have to be stepping away from the work all the time to be constantly improving the work. It'd be great if you have it, if you have that time, but often we don't have that opportunity. So with the future state mapping, we look at what are the opportunities to improve the flow across the value stream in the areas that we've highlighted as the most problematic. We can also do other things that surface. Often, we're doing the basics. We're saying, let's create a definition of workflow. Let's implement WIP limits. Let's start tracking work item aging. All these things that are good practices for flow. We are layering those things in because in most cases that doesn't exist today. And then we can map, because we collected our baseline, we can collect what the ROI of all of our efforts is expected to be, and that helps us make a case for getting it done. So once we have all this information, we have a lot of good ideas, right? A lot of things that we could do. And then the question becomes, how do we get these things done? And so the flow roadmap really is our final stage where we lay out what are we actually going to tackle, when, and how. And so we'll take all the insights that we collect, and often it's much busier than this. We can end up with 150 items, and it's no problem actually, because we can prioritize them, we can distill them down, we can filter them out. We do a lot of synthesis to take all that raw material and transform it into really powerful and consequential experiments. And in some cases, we spend quite a bit of time on this because we have billions of dollars at stake. But, if you're talking about a single team and you don't expect that kind of ROI, you can go pretty lean with this, and you might only have a handful of things. But once we've laid these things out, we will lay them out in a very simple roadmap: now, next, later. Now is that top right of very important, very feasible. So essentially things that we should really do right away, the low-hanging fruit. But we also lay out things that, we don't want to ignore, but they're dependent on us doing other things first, or, just because we can't tackle everything all at once, we break these things out. And these can be our milestones, our actions, our experiments. But I think something that's pretty unique to flow engineering and how we do roadmaps is that we also want to measure how we're going to understand progress. How are we going to report to leadership that we're headed in the right direction? How are we going to know that we're headed in the right direction? And so we identify measures of progress, but also owners of progress. Who's going to move it forward? Who's going to make sure that it gets done? Who's going to lead the effort? So we fill that out for each of these and make sure that all of these efforts are eventually owned by someone, but we don't have to define everything all at once. Again, we're only digging deeper where there's gold. So the one way, if I were to summarize all of this, and I want to get to, questions as soon as possible, but let me break it down for you. The first thing we do in flow engineering is figure out, what do we want? And we all get on the same page about it. And that's really important because often we're not part of the same team, right? We could be part of the same value stream, but today we're multiple teams and we're throwing work over the wall at each other. And so to get on the same page is a very valuable thing all on its own. But we don't stop there. We talk about what's in the way of the thing that we want. What is currently holding us back? And then we try to understand why that's happening, because to actually address it, we need to understand more about it. And we probably have a problem because we don't quite understand how all the causes are coming together, or what is, the right starting point to address those problems. And then we envision what a better system of work would look like. And that can be a number of different things, right? It could be reorganizing ourselves. It could be changing our definition of workflow. It could be tracking different metrics. It could be different cadences and practices that we take on. Or it could be that we just stop doing things that aren't delivering value to us today. And it could be all of those things. And then we'll lay out specific steps, actions, interventions, whatever you want to call them, experiments to get to that future state, to define that workflow that will deliver better results, and we really believe is a better way of working. So where you can start to look for opportunities for this, and if you're interested in making a case for this type of work in your organization, or you want to try out flow, you're already doing this, and you just want to try out flow engineering as an approach, look for where you have friction, where things are underperforming despite everybody working really hard, where things tend to be overcomplicated, or you can't quite get on the same page and get things done efficiently and effectively, where it's unclear why things are hard, or what is our current performance, where should we be focusing, or just creating this common view or even a common language. This could be very valuable. And then understanding where you should be investing your time, and how do you connect your efforts to the outcomes that the organization is looking for. How do you get investment? How do you get buy-in? How do you get promoted? How do you position yourself to be successful in a new role? These can be things that you pursue with flow engineering really effectively. And a couple of these that are on my mind lately, and I think that folks are applying flow engineering to very effectively, are where to invest in AI. If you invest in AI upstream of a constraint, you're just creating more problems downstream. And if you're investing in AI downstream of a constraint, then you're not going to realize any benefits from it, right? You're already starving that opportunity by constraining it upstream. So understanding where you should be investing in AI and what the actual return on that investment could and should be can be informed by flow engineering. You can have better conversations across the organization about where to invest in AI if you're all looking at the same workflow, if you're looking at what you're actually doing and making that decision together. I think that's extremely effective. A lot of folks struggle with dependencies. I hear about dependencies all the time. Most people talk about managing dependencies, but what we really focus on with flow engineering is mitigating dependencies. We want to get rid of them. We want to diminish their impact on workflow. And so we can do that very effectively with flow engineering. And then the scenario I alluded to earlier, if you have recently been promoted or you want to get promoted, or you are interested in, getting a handle on or getting a head start with a new job, understanding the current workflow, understanding the current target outcome is extremely powerful, extremely valuable. So you can use flow engineering for that very, very quickly and effectively. Classic challenge is that business and tech are at odds. They don't trust each other. They feel like the other side is out to sabotage them, whatever it is. This is an opportunity to bring them together. And then if you're in a situation where you already have a system of work that doesn't seem to be working, or everybody's working really hard, trying really hard, and you're just not getting to where you would like to get to, this is an opportunity to really look at what's actually happening today and what could have the greatest impact on improving our conditions. So this is very rapid, as I mentioned. These are 90-minute workshops. You do 5 of them. You don't have to do all 5. You could stop at outcome mapping. You could use some other inputs to create a flow roadmap. You could use different methods for dependency mapping. There's all kinds of different options that you have with this. It is prescriptive only in that each of these workshops feeds into the next one. So if you have a way of aligning on a target outcome, you don't have to do outcome mapping. But if you don't have a clear target, it's very difficult to do value stream mapping effectively. So we've ordered these practices to build on each other. And each of them, again, is digging deeper where there's gold. So we find gold dust, and that leads us to gold nuggets, and the gold nuggets lead us to a gold vein, and the vein leads to a deposit. And we're only building mining infrastructure where we have significant gold deposits. That's the whole theory behind flow engineering and how we keep it very lean. So if that is interesting to you, if you are looking for more, if you would like to learn about this, we have a lot of different options. First of all, I would say, reach out to me via my website. I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to hear what you're working on and where, you think this could be helpful to you, or any of your feedback. And then we've recently put out a course, a video course. So if that's the way that you learn best, you can follow along with that. There's also the book and the audio book, depending on whether that's how you like to learn about things. And then there's lots of articles and information out there in a number of different places. There's also other presentations. So if you're interested in more, there's lots out there, and I'm happy to point you towards it if you want to reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. But I'd also love to get questions, so hopefully we have enough time for that.
We do have some questions here, and I just put a link to your website, your LinkedIn profile, and your X profile in the
Awesome.
in the
Thanks.
chat. If there's anything else that would be, feel free to throw that in. Let me jump over and let's take a look at our questions. Okay, so top rated question. Do you find that organizations are generally pretty open to mapping out the flow of their processes like you showed here, or their resistance? What does that look like?
Well, I think that for different reasons, organizations can be very receptive to this. I hear from a lot of organizations where, they are ultimately interested in cost cutting. And, that doesn't necessarily mean that people are getting fired, but they might be thinking, we might not have the right people in the right places. And we are interested in automating things, and we have a lot of manual work. So there can be a lot of appetite for that. And of course, we try and channel that into situations that are ultimately better for people. I've never seen anyone fired as a result of flow engineering. So there is that. But in some organizations, they could feel like they're really interested in this. And then once you start showing how complicated things are and how messy things are, it can get a little uncomfortable. So it's very helpful to have a facilitator who, or just be conscious of that before you start facilitating this, that you want to set the tone. You want to be very clear that we are looking at all the mess that's happening today. And that's the point. If it was perfect, we would have nothing to do. If it was nice and clean, you wouldn't be having that conversation. But by sweeping it under the rug, you don't get out of that situation and things don't get better. So I think that's one of the hardest things about facilitation, is that you really do have to be navigating the culture, being very considerate of the emotional aspect of this, and the social and political aspects of this. But with some facilitation practice, or if you're used to facilitating workshops, that wouldn't be new to you.
Okay, next question. Any synergies with the discipline of business architecture and modeling concepts within, inclusive of value streams, business capabilities, organizations, and information?
I think there's potentially humongous synergies here, but in my experience with business architecture, it misses the mark in a couple of places. One is that value isn't quite a first-class citizen in business architecture, and organizational performance, they tend to be part of the conversation, but there's a lot of emphasis on static and exhaustive representations of capabilities. Like, let's define every capability in the organization, and let's define, an exhaustive list of all the value streams. That to me is very expensive, very risky activity. Which is a reason why we only say, what is the target outcome that we're pursuing? And let's understand everything in service of that. We don't have to exhaustively map the entire organization, because there's massively diminishing returns in that. So you can use, oh, I just lost my video. I switched over my camera today and it actually lasted way longer than I thought it would, but it won't survive this whole thing, unfortunately. Okay, so I think that business architecture should be moving in this direction, but it tends to be this very static, it's typical architecture. Typical architecture is, let's create a ton of artifacts that almost no one ever looks at. And so if you're in an organization where business architecture is actually driving organizational performance, if it's informing the operating model, it's actually reconciling itself with reality on a regular basis, this is an extremely powerful way of catalyzing that and actually building that out in a way that it's all connected to value, all connected to target outcomes, all driven by including the business and all the contributors and all the people who are part of that business architecture, rather than an ivory tower representation or something that's overly comprehensive. So I hope that answered the question. Probably went way over what you were hoping for, but yeah, I think business architecture is probably one of the most tragically misused functions in organizations.
Okay, so three more questions here. Next one is, will you please share how this model works in services operation Kanban world?
Yeah, so I've recently started spending a lot of time with the Kanban world. So one of my big clients, we're building out, well, we're reorganizing the entire business around value streams very intentionally, but we're actually transitioning all their teams to Kanban. So not just in services and operations, Kanban everywhere, flow all the way from vision to portfolio and then out to the teams, down to all the delivery teams and all the operations teams. I'm a big fan of Kanban. Where this can fit in is that, and where I've talked to, I've been talking to the pro Kanban folks. I'm collaborating right now. Actually, I finished doing a workshop with Colleen and Daniel Vacante from the pro Kanban world. Value stream mapping and what we define in flow engineering can be the basis of your definition of workflow in Kanban. So it can help you lay out your Kanban board to be more reflective of what your actual workflow is and design your workflow in a way that it's optimal for flow. We can also use all the data from Kanban to actually reference when we're creating our value stream maps. So we can make data-driven maps rather than perspective-driven maps. Although the perspective-driven maps are really, really valuable. I think they're like underappreciated and undervalued because people's experience is a very, very powerful force in organizations. We're not just trying to chase data for accuracy. We want people to be engaged and to take ownership over performance. And so getting their data is very, very important. But we pull all that together. And, for things like incident response, we map that all the time. We map things like disaster recovery processes. We map onboarding. We map integrations. We map anything. And the more Kanban it is, the easier it is to map. So in a lot of cases, we're taking Scrum teams and transitioning them because it creates this tight feedback loop and almost like a flywheel for performance improvement. And I can see the next question. I'm going to save you, Mark. I can read it out. So, is your method related to or from Karen Martin value stream mapping? You'll see, well, you probably can't see unless you zoom in a lot, but you'll see that the foreword to flow engineering is from Karen Martin. We are big fans of hers, and she's probably done more than anyone in terms of bringing value stream mapping to knowledge work. But the reason that we created our book was we wanted something even lighter weight, even simpler, even easier for folks to tackle, and more digitally native. So we wrote this over the pandemic. We wrote this to be very remote friendly and meet folks where they are in software development. So it's entirely focused on knowledge work, although you could use the same practices to go back to physical manufacturing. But the physical world has lots of stuff already. They already have Six Sigma. They already have all these practices figured out. This is really focused on knowledge work and where things get really, really complex and it's very hard to actually see what's happening. So that's kind of where we're focused, but we build on Karen's. We're like huge fans of Karen's and, so lucky to have her book because if anyone's interested in the hard science behind this, we point them to Karen's book. We point them to, Mike Rothers and John Shook's book. We point them to the theory of constraints. We point them to a lot of the theory that's already been established in the space, and we get that benefit because they've done all the hard work before we started working. Do you have any examples where AI was able to apply to the actual bottleneck? Yeah, so in a lot of cases, we're very early with that. A lot of people are adding AI without thinking about how it has an impact on workflow or anything measurable. But there has been a lot of cases where there was a manual handoff or some sort of approval that was very simple once we took a look at it. And what was missing was a template for folks to fill out that the person who was doing all the approvals didn't generate because they were totally overloaded. And we were able to have an interview, feed the interview content into generative AI, create a template and documentation as a result of that. That's very, very like low lift, right? Like you can do that today. That's where I see a lot of low hanging fruit today. And so that's a very, very simple use case that I think is very applicable to a lot of things that are happening in value streams today. But it does go even further than that. Of course, you can be doing things like writing entire integrations with AI, and we also do that.
Cool, Steve. That this has been great, very, very helpful. I do see we had one request for the slides that people will be able to see it on YouTube. If that is something you want to share, if you send it to me and any other
Sure.
links that maybe we didn't cover, I'll send it out to everybody that attended today. But yes, thank you everybody for coming. And Steve, thank you so much. This has been great. And I see we've got Lori, love the talk. She has to drop off, but she's going to go buy your book. So that's a good outcome, right?
That's a very good outcome. I really
Okay.
appreciate the time.
Thank you so much. And like I said, if you give me your slides, any other links, I'll get these out to everybody so they can follow up on anything else that they want to know more about. But thank you so much. You have a great day. And thank you everybody for coming. Oh, one short thing. On Thursday morning, I'm going to do a session at 8 a.m. Eastern time. This is mostly for people that are living on a different continent where this is an inconvenient time. But if anybody wants to get up at 8 a.m. Eastern and join for that about Scrum Mastering, I would love to see you guys there. The invite should be on your calendar now. So thank you very much, everybody. I'll see you later.
Thanks. Thanks, Mark.